Welcome to Truman's Town Hall with your host, Matt Truman.
Hello. This is Matt Truman. Thank you for downloading this episode. Thank you for sharing with a friend. Today is April 25th, 2023, and you're listening to Truman's Town Hall. Folks, we have a banger, as they say, of a podcast today, whenever you listen to it. We're going to talk about Waco. The 30th anniversary just happened on April 19th. We're going to talk about the Second Amendment, Tucker Carlson. We're going to talk about central bank digital currencies. And if we have time, we'll throw in some World War III, because that's what we talk about here on Truman's Town Hall. It's good to be back on the audio broadcast. I tried some videos, and I'll still put out some videos from time to time, but I enjoy this format. I'm sorry. I enjoy the radio format, the podcast format, the audio podcast format. So I'm going to start pumping more of these out. Share them. If you would, please share them with your friends. If you want to not share it publicly, send them a message, send them a text. Say, hey, check out Truman's Town Hall podcast on Facebook. Check out Truman's Town Hall on Rumble. Check out Truman's Town Hall on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get podcasts. Check it out. All right. Yeah, we're back, audio. So let's talk about Waco for a minute. April 19th, 2023 was the 30th anniversary of the Waco massacre. I follow and I'm friends with some folks who are connected to what happened in 1993. Some of the survivors. One of the more outspoken survivors, David Thibodeau. He wrote a book. He had that Netflix series. I mean, he's been out there a lot, able to open up and tell this story. And I'm glad more folks are seeing what happened and listening. I think there are. He put out, if you want to be a part of this, if you want to join in on Zoom, if you can't make it down here to the museum there in Waco, where they were holding the memorial, I'll send you a code. So I sent him, please send me a code. He sent me the code. I jumped in. I was on Zoom watching the whole memorial, and they were talking to us. They had a computer set up, and then they had a big screen so the folks that actually came to the museum could see the folks on Zoom. I mean, it was well done. And some of the folks that were talking were just remarkable. Their testimonies were just heartfelt. And if this is out, I will put it in the description. There's a woman named Wessinger that is the one that will put this on YouTube, I think, this 30th memorial. Anyway, watching this, I was 16 years old when this happened, and I remember it very vividly. It's one of those memories that just sticks out to you. Watching it on the news and watching their home, their church, and all the folks inside burning up. What a horror! I mean, one can't imagine. Things that I think about. What would be the most horrible way to go? It's got to be number one. Drowning, number two. I don't even want to go down that road. But I was watching a lot of different videos after this memorial, and just after hearing their testimony, I had to go and listen to more. It's very compelling. And I came across a video from Dr. James Tabor. He put out the last recording, or the last recorded words of David Koresh, April 16th and 18th, 1993. This is about a year ago. He's under James Tabor. I'll try to link it in the description as well on YouTube. But I'm going to play the part that stood out to me the most. It was Steve Snyder talking with an FBI negotiator. I believe his name is Harry. It wasn't the Nesser dude that's portrayed by Michael Shannon, Gary Nesser or whatever. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. I apologize. It wasn't him. It was some guy named Henry. Steve Snyder's talking to this Henry fella. and just breaks it down, talks about the deep state, talks about the news media being corrupt, talks about the secret societies, things that JFK was talking about way, way before then, and Eisenhower with the military-industrial complex. These things that, I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory to know this stuff nowadays. Conspiracy theorists have now become, vindicated in this day and age. It's wild to live in this time. Before, it was a fantasy that a lot of people had. Now it's just a fantasy for a few of the dumb ones out there of all this stuff. Steve Snyder even talks about media personalities telling the truth and being booted from their outlets. What just happened? What I'm about to play was a discussion that happened in 1993 between someone trapped in his house by the government and a government official. And he's saying it right to their face with no cares in the world, knowing that there are tanks pointed at his home. Anyway, here's Steve Snyder. Folks, if this doesn't ring a bell for you, I don't know what will.
I can't talk to the outside world. You've taken care of that, your kind of people. The press are so far back that you guys could come and blow us away, and you could give any kind of a story you wanted. But I don't care if you, let me tell you something, Jim. I really don't care if you did or didn't in the first place. The point being, there is a God that you and I stand before, whether you and I believe it or not. And one day, all of us give an account. And I mean, this group does fear God first over man.
I believe that.
I know you believe that.
I know that.
But, it's starting to become annoying after all these days of sitting here. When I see this kind of stuff and you hear it on the radio, I mean, I've known for years what's been happening. No, listen to me, please. I just want to get something off my chest.
Okay,
because, after a while, it gets very annoying. For years and years, as a young person, I was into the study of history because one does not want to repeat the mistakes of others. I've always wanted to see why there was a First World War, why a Second World War. So in taking a lot of history classes through high school and so forth, many questions were raised but few answered. And the answers that were given never really made a lot of sense. There was not a lot of logic or sense to those answers. Then I started hearing about a group called the Council on Foreign Relations, a group called the Trilateral Commission.
I've heard of that.
I know, the Illuminati. Come to find out they're real organizations with the Rockefellers and all these great merchants behind all of these politicians always being puppets. But your agency and all those are part of that whole thing. Taking away the freedoms of Americans, using innuendos and all sorts of the ways to go about doing it. More legislation, more regulations, more laws, so that ultimately a person has no freedoms. So taxed to death that you never have a choice with the hard-earned money you make to choose to where it should be paid.
Yeah.
I mean, think of this whole thing. But here you're part of an agency, a part of the government that has done some of the most... I saw that Gun Owners of America, that video. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you ever got to view that one that talks about your agency, how you're lawbreakers, and what you did to those two policemen that were good cops all their life, all those 20 years out in New Jersey.
Right.
I mean, if that doesn't tee off an American that's into freedom, and I'm for your freedom also, for your freedoms of choice.
Right.
But what you guys have already showed me, what you did with the Weaver case, I mean, that already bothered me. And here now I'm involved in something like this.
Yeah.
Whatever happens to me, I hope that you have yourself right with God. That you're not part of an organization or part of something that, I mean, God condemns that kind of thing. You might think he condemns a lot of things we're doing or from what you've heard about us, but you've gotten to hear a lot of things out of the mouth of David here.
Yeah.
And you go find your greatest theologian in the world. If there's some truth to that Bible, I think you said your background was Catholic?
Well, when I was a little boy, and then now I'm a Christian.
Whatever that means, I mean, I'm not a Christian. I've always wanted to be a Christian, but a Christian is something I have not seen in my whole lifetime. But anyway, aside from that, but, I'm again concerned about what's going on. All my years in this country of America, I've always loved the Constitution, the statements of men like Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson, some of these men. But this country is no longer what it was then. Now there's men that have very powerful men that those guys that do get into office. I mean, when you look at someone like Bush and Clinton, both associated to the Trilateral Commission, who are you voting for? Just like in the 80s. You had, what's his name, Anderson and Carter. Carter being the first member, the first one to become president in 76, handpicked by Rockefeller in 73. Every cabinet member belonged to the Trilateral Commission. What on earth is this? What's happened to this country? But you don't read about it in the press. Is it controlled is the question? Well, how come you don't get a broader view of things?
Yeah.
And those men that are on these talk shows even, right away, if there's someone in there that starts speaking logic or sense, or if they raise a question about your agency or anything else, who's watching the watchdog?
Right.
You understand? Who's watching the watchdog? Right away, they get usually taken off or their time is out. I mean, I've watched this all my life. I've always considered myself to be a conservative, someone who is not into taxes, who's into the freedom of people so that they can express themselves, they can create, they can do, as long as they're not hurting their fellow man, they're doing the best. But I mean, that's not the way this country's degenerating to, and this is what the Bible shows in advance. But, you know, me watching this, you know, like you hear this on the radio and so forth, here we go again. But maybe, if we're right, what we're telling you through the Bible, what David's showing you, there's going to be a one last time. People are going to be answering. There's going to be someone that's going to open up a book that has to do with your eternal salvation, my eternal salvation. If it's not him, it's going to be somebody. And I could give you enough chapters of the Old Testament. It talks about a man that comes in the final days, one salvation. And they can't controvert it. That's what all these proud of it. Totally unaware.
Yeah.
Wow, dude. Did that blow your mind? I mean, if you think like I do. Not many people do. But if you're thinking like I am, that makes total sense. Yes, there's a deep state. Yes, he didn't sound angry as much as he was concerned. There was like, you know, that road in between angry and concerned, where you're just like, stern. I mean, he talked about the news media kicking off people like Tucker Carlson. He talked about being conservative and loving freedom. That's what I always preach on here. Very articulate. The man was very articulate, as well as Mr. David Thibodeau, as well as a lot of folks who went around this group. And their leader, or the one that they called pastor and whatever, I don't know what they called him, honestly, David Koresh, a.k.a. Vernon Howell. He said many times, these people here, they're not dumb. They're from around the world. They've got Ivy League education, some of them. They questioned me on my beliefs. It took me a long time to get them to understand or to get them to believe what I was saying. I don't know. Did he have a hypnotic trance that he put on it? Who knows, folks? I don't know. I wasn't there. I was 16. But I do know that Steve Snyder, that dude, had a lot to say. Things that were happening then that nobody was awake to. Now, with the invention of the internet, we're all awake to this, but some of us choose to close our mind to any of it. Oh, it's just a conspiracy. I don't want to look like a nut. You know, Matt, I think like you, and I believe what you're saying, but I don't want to say it out loud, because what if I do? Then people are going to call me crazy. Who cares anymore, folks? Who cares what people think about you? Who cares what people say about you? It doesn't matter. Do you know who you are? If you know who you are, and I know who I am, who cares what anybody else thinks? It does not matter to me if you're listening to this thinking, oh, Matt's a fruitcake. Okay, so what? Am I harming anyone? No, I'm just trying to wake you up to what's reality today in 2023. 30 years ago, Steve Snyder was trying to wake up an FBI hostage negotiator. I don't know. Maybe he... No, definitely didn't. All right, folks. I wanted to share that with you because on the 19th, it was 30 years, man. 30 years ago this happened. I encourage you to look into it. Look up WacoSurvivors.com. Yeah, look up WacoSurvivors.com. You'll find a lot. They have the memorial from 2021. It looks like is on there. All their memorials. They have just a ton of stuff. a blog, a shop. You can get a shirt, a book, rules of engagements on there. Just a lot of different things. They got all kinds of cool stuff. So check them out. And the money goes to the survivors. It's ran by the survivors. So help them out, folks. Anyway, something that there were a couple things that Steve Snyder hit on in that little clip. One was the Second Amendment. And we'll get to Tucker in a minute because Steve Snyder even hit on that even before knowing who the heck Tucker Carlson was. Because in 93, I didn't know who Tucker Carlson was. I don't think anybody did. I don't think he may have been working in media at the time, but probably just starting out, he'd probably been like 26 or something. I don't know. But the Second Amendment, I think, is very important. It was important to the folks in Waco, and doggone, if it wasn't, boy, a lot of them been hurt. There was a story I saw that's really tragic. There was a guy named Matt Hoover. He's CRS Firearms on YouTube, and he was convicted, as well as Justin Irving, in the auto key card case. Basically what it was a little metal card that you got, and you could punch it out and possibly create a fully automatic AR-15. Throughout the court case, the ATF tried to recreate this. It took them like 12 agents and 4 or 5 of these cards in order to get one to work. And they also had to use a Dremel tool and some other things. And yeah, okay, so there was a lot to this thing. They were able to test it, apparently. And these fellas get convicted of it. Oh, did I mention that this Matt Hoover guy allegedly called the ATF and said, hey, is this card illegal? And they told him no. So then he promotes it on his YouTube page and then gets his home raided. And wow, dude, the ATF, they're working overtime, continuing to work overtime. Here, check this out.
We got to talk about someone named Matt Hoover. Now, I have been very reluctant to speak too much on this on my channel for the simple reason that it could affect the outcome of the case. Now, one of the things that's really important to understand is during a pending trial and during a pending investigation, anything that is said on the internet can be twisted and used against a defendant the exact same way that raising funds for a defense can be twisted and tied into conspiracy to commit a felony. And that's why I've been kind of at an arm's length. I've been watching very closely, but it's one of those things that I want to give the individual the best chance possible without adding something into the mix that was not of their doing that would only complicate things. Now, the simple fact is he has just been convicted of 17 counts of felony. Basically, the idea was he enabled machine gun conversion kits to be sold to the open market. That's the very high level. And there's 2 pieces to this, okay? And here's how this factors in, because there's 2 individuals. There's a person with the last name of Irving, who is the actual manufacturer of something called a lightning card link, or this is a little card that the ATF is proposing that is a machine gun because it can be manufactured into one. And then on the other side, you've got Hoover, who's CRS Firearms on the YouTube channel, who is basically arrested for providing funds or marketing that item that was then confirmed to be a machine gun from the ATF. Again, this is their stance, not mine. In my personal opinion, that doesn't make it a machine gun, and that's really where it gets down to the crux of the problem. This is coming into readily convertible. This is the exact same language in the 1968 Gun Control Act that they leveraged to use the ghost gun rule, to use the Biden pistol brace rule. All of these things that they've done through the executive bureaucracy of the ATF have been through redefinition or stretching definitions of existing law. They didn't pass new laws through Congress. They reinterpreted and used definitions, whether new or conventional, to get their outcome. And that's where we find ourselves. So Irving was essentially selling this piece of equipment that the feds would say is a machine gun. That's not what I'm making this about right this second. I'll get to that in a second. The part where CRS Firearm gets involved, and this is the part that's much more concerning, is because there was actual marketing and because there was a fundraising effort to help an individual in their case. Now you're talking about a conspiracy because money changed hands towards the manufacturer of a machine gun conversion, which we all know is not. That's the crux of the problem, is what the ATF or the federal government is calling machine gun is a piece of metal. Again, readily convertible is coming back to bite us right in the butt. We'll get to that in a second. The thing that I have a question now, if this is the scenario, if it's considered conspiracy, what Hoover did that they convicted him of, if that's conspiracy of marketing for something that could be considered a machine gun, what does that mean to every single YouTuber, every single advertising firm, every single magazine that recommended the wide open triggers or the rare breed triggers or the FRTs? What does that mean? Because the ATF and the feds are now calling those things machine gun conversions as well. So does that mean every single person that had anything to do with that is now guilty of conspiracy to sell machine gun conversion parts? I think the interesting part to that is, of course they aren't. They didn't do that. They sold a product that was approved by the ATF. So if they're selling something that's approved by the ATF and other YouTubers or marketers are operating from a perspective of see this, check it out if you want to see it, how can that be their fault as well? And that's kind of where it gets into the murky game. If you're tying something with that loose of a definition and essentially nailing CRS Firearms or Matt Hoover to the wall for conspiracy to create felonies through selling of machine gun conversions, that's a pretty loose definition that can be applied in a pretty negative manner. Now, let's back it out a little bit further. We're talking about what the ATF has deemed a machine gun. Again, obviously, a piece of metal with a drawing on it which makes something do something if you actually manufacture it is no different than if you manufacture an AR-15 to be full auto. It's the same concept. A piece of metal isn't a firearm until you convert it into one. It's the same argument they've used for ghost guns, like I mentioned, for readily convertible into a firearm. This is the exact same game. The only problem is Hoover got pinched because something that he was recommending was used as a machine gun in cases that were pretty subjective. And you can't actually prove that Matt Hoover did anything to sell machine guns. Now, Matt Hoover is facing down 45 years now because of an incorrect definition through readily convertible and Chevron deference of the ATF that someone else was selling. The lines and the jumps here are pretty weak. Now, where does that leave us? Again, I don't want to do anything that's going to interfere with his appeal. I don't want to do anything that could harm his family through that process. So I'm trying to keep as high level as I can. But the bottom line here is we now have a system and an environment in which the lines of conspiracy to committing felonies have just gotten drawn so thin and proven and convicted. This is something that should give pause to every single American. This is not something that should just worry YouTubers or people who run marketing campaigns on magazines. This should worry every single American because now any type of advertisement could potentially be used against you to prove conspiracy on something that's legal today and could be illegal tomorrow. This is another case of the retroactivity of bans, illegality, and all those things that can have an extremely negative impact on freedom, not to mention the individual's future, their family's future, all these things. And that's kind of where we're at.
All right, folks, there it is. The case of the ATF, again, going after Matt Hoover. If you feel compelled, you can give, send, go. You can give some money to help support Matt Hoover. At Supporting the Hoover, it says he's already raised $11,747. That's great. I'm going to give to it. I'm going to give to it. The funds for this campaign will be received by Erica Hoover, who is his wife, and he has kids. So, man, this guy, how do you do that? How are you an ATF agent and put a guy like this, a guy who's just doing stuff on YouTube? So they sold a card. And then you have to break it all out. You have to cut it out with a special tool. You have to Dremel it out to get it to fit in the weapon. You have to do all this manufacturing. If somebody's going to go to that length, I think they're a criminal already. That might be, that card might be good to have just to throw it in a lockbox and in case the Russians invaded, break it out. But even then, I'm not a big automatic weapon dude. When I was over in Afghanistan, my selector was always on semi, so I knew where my rounds were hidden. The only time you really go to auto, in my opinion, is when you need to lay cover fire. But I don't know. I digress. So yeah, Give, See, and Go, supporting the Hoover. Check that out. I'm going to give some money there because this is just outrageous. We are living in strange times. Like, have you heard about the pistol brace ban? It's an AR-15 with a different brace. It's not the collapsible stock that many ARs have with the buffer and everything. It's a different style. It's a pistol brace, and they want to ban it. For what? It's stupid. It's like Trump's bump stock ban. Bro, you can take a rubber band, I can hold on to a belt loop, whatever, to make something fully automatic if I wanted to throw lead down range. It makes no sense. But these are the types of things so that these bureaucracies like the ATF and whatever can earn a budget. We're proving we're doing something, so give us more money, government. Because any government agency or government department, if they don't spend that money, it's cut. So they have to prove why they're spending all this money. It's wasteful spending, and we need somebody in office, I don't know, a couple different people, to monitor all this. Anyway, all right. Hey, what about Tucker Carlson?
Tucker Carlson is out at Fox News? Oh my God. Does this mean Fox News has gone woke?
Fox News has severed bow ties with Tucker Carlson. After all these years, they are parting ways, which means he was fired. I mean, that's really what parting ways means.
He's running out of options now. Like, soon he's just going to be on the Weather Channel saying that hurricanes are caused by drag queens.
You know that stupid look that's always on Tucker Carlson's face?
First I was shocked. Then I was confused. Then I did the Tucker laugh.
The good news is now Tucker can spend more time at home tanning his testicles and touching himself to that sexy green M&M.
Wow. I can't believe that a network that's so opposed to gender-affirming surgery just cut off their own
None of that was funny. It was horrible jokes, but they have to do it. They're the late night talk show host. I mean, Carson probably would have done it. Letterman probably would have done it. They all probably would have done it. But sure, joke all you want. But this dude's going to come back stronger and more unleashed, I think. I think he will. It's either that or he's going to say, you know what, I'm just going to tie flies and go fishing, which would be respectable too. I mean, if it was me and I had millions of dollars just to chill for the next couple of months, I might do it. I don't know. I would definitely think about it. If I had a couple mil in the bank and all I had to do was tie ties, get the kids off to school, cook dinner, I'd cook every meal. Here's what I'd do if I was in Tucker's place. If I was Tucker Carlson, if you listen to this, here's what you need to do. Kick back, brother. Wake up at about 7. I mean, if you got to get up earlier because your kids are older like me, that's fine. Get up at 6. Wake the kids up. Bang out 20 push-ups. Get breakfast started. When that bacon's frying, bang out 20 more push-ups. Scramble up some eggs, get them in the pan, bang out 10. And just cook breakfast and do push-ups. Feed your kids, send them off on the bus. Come back inside, make yourself an omelet. Cheese, onion, ham, all that stuff. Then pop on the news. I don't know. Or the YouTubes and let it run. Or the Rumble and let it run. Then mow the grass. Paint the fence, build something, plant some seeds, and grow a beautiful garden. Dude, Tucker, you need to just chill out because the world's going to hell in a handbasket anyway. Why not? I mean, the central bank digital currency, we talked about the Second Amendment, and we heard, I mean, if you're paying attention, you heard that like all the major credit card companies were trying to bring out this ability to attach a code to gun stores or anywhere a firearm was sold. I mean, they're already kind of doing that, but they wanted to bring it out in the open. So like if you purchase something at Kroger's, there's a code to that. And if you look on your receipt or on your bank statement or pull up your app, you'll see there's a little code that goes to your transactions. And this is how they're able to track what you buy. That could get even worse if we move to the central bank digital currency, because everything's digital. They can shut it off, just like they did in Canada when the truckers protested. When the truckers protested, all those that were out there that were showing themselves to be protesters all over the internet, they got their bank accounts shut down. Guess what doesn't do that? Guess what you can't do that with, government? Cash. They want to remove cash so they can track your every move. It sounds crazy. It's like, really? Come on, Matt. But at the same time, it makes sense, because folks who want to gain control, all these politicians, these bureaucrats who want to control you, will need to track you.
All three of the Abrahamic religions teach that lending to the poor is an act of compassion that serves the entire community, and therefore charging interest was seen as immoral. It was called usury and was considered a heinous crime. The Roman Empire allowed usury, but in 1179, the Catholic Church decreed that usury was forbidden. This law did not apply to Jews. While the Torah admonishes usury, Talmudic law allows a Jew to practice usury with a non-Jew, and so money lending became primarily a Jewish business. Over the years, usury became more accepted in Western society, and we've changed the definition with the addendum of charging interest at an excessive rate. In the 17th century, the Bank of England began issuing paper fiat money. This gave the banks the ability to simply print money out of thin air. And for over a century, this was rightfully called out as fraud until it became public policy, known now as fractional reserve banking. What was once seen as immoral is now seen as normal. Many assume that the financial loans given out by the banks are coming from savings they hold for their depositors. But this is not true. When someone takes out a loan, the bank creates new money out of thin air and then charges the person interest to borrow it. Fractional reserve banking allows the banks to legally create 10 times the amount of each deposit. This inflating of the circulating currency devalues that currency and allows the banks an opportunity to profit dramatically. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 began a system of debt designed to inflate beyond its means until it implodes, the exact opposite of sound money. The banking cartel funded both sides of World War I, which led to the Great Depression, which led to the Emergency Banking Act of 1933, which ended the gold standard and made every dollar spent an IOU to further increase the debt, which is ultimately owed by the American people. The banking cartel funded both sides of World War II, which led to the Bretton Woods monetary system, which made the USD the world reserve currency, and gave central banks the option to go straight to the gold window of the U.S. Treasury to exchange U.S. dollars for physical gold. But by endlessly creating more debt, it became clear that the U.S. had printed far beyond their gold reserves. And when several nations came to collect their gold, the federal government dishonorably closed the gold window. To maintain world reserve currency status, the U.S. turned to its military, guns for hire to Saudi Arabia in return for the petrodollar, and war with any nation who threatens USD dominance. A Ponzi scheme is an investment fraud that pays existing investors with funds collected from new investors. And that's what the bankers created. They profit exponentially off the people's debt. It was designed to collapse, and that's what it's doing now. All the markets are crashing, and the derivatives market alone is in the quadrillions, which is much more than the total financial assets of the entire world. There is nothing left to prop up the dollar. This Ponzi scheme is at its end. What that means is that the money you have in the banks will disappear. Everything will go to zero, and then we reset. How we do that will ultimately be up to the people. The banking cartel knows that the only way they can survive this collapse is to somehow convert everyone to an authoritarian CBDC. But without the people's trust, the banks will have problems with this. Many people will lose everything and will want nothing but justice from the old banking system. But many others will comply. Hard times are coming fast, and if we were smart, we'd prepare. Let the big banks die and create a banking system that serves we the people. Reporting for InfoWars, this is Greg Reese.
All right, so that was Greg Reese with InfoWars talking about where we're headed financially. Look around, folks. I mean, think about your home. Maybe you own a home. If you do, you'll realize that your home value's higher. Just look it up on Zillow. Your home value's higher, considerably higher. Guess what happens when you're appraised by your county, at least for us here in Ohio? That home value is going to be higher. Therefore, property taxes will be higher. But your dollar, the money you need to go buy groceries with, buy a dozen eggs with, is going to be worth less. This is inflation, folks. This is the recession we're in. Wake up, America. America's not awake. If you're listening to this podcast, maybe you are awake. I don't know. But America is not awake. Your neighbors, not awake. That's why you share this podcast or share others like it that are spreading a message of truth, that is spreading a message of we have to do better. We have to be more fiscally conservative. As much as my liberal friends don't want to hear it, we have to. We can't bow down to agendas that are trying to destroy our republic. Speaking of the destruction of our republic, what about if World War III would pop off? I don't want to see that. Do you want to see that? No, you don't want to see that. Trust me, war sucks. It's long hours, long days, and sometimes you get shot at or lobbed a mortar at. Whenever I've had mortars lobbed at me, they're not fun. I saw one explode and thought it was an IED being detonated by our EOD. It wasn't. It was a doggone mortar. It's nuts, folks. War sucks. You don't want to be a part of it. Trust me. Unless it's absolutely necessary. Now, if Chinese troops or Russian troops or Venezuelan troops or Iranian troops or whoever's troops started parachuting in my backyard, you're darn skippy. I'm going to pick up a rifle and defend my land. But sending billions and trillions over to Ukraine because we have some guy we don't like invading a country that has no connection to the United States other than it used to be a Soviet country is beyond me. We were not supposed to go past Germany with NATO, yet we just allowed, as NATO, as members of NATO, we just allowed a country to join. Finland and Russia do not get along. They fought wars, folks. It's history. Look it up. We're heading in a direction that we don't need to head in. And it seems that it's possible that this is the plan. There's a conspiracy out there that Tucker got kicked off because he was exposing the war in Ukraine and the Nazis that are fighting this war, like actual Nazis, not the ones these Antifa folks claim that I am or that you are, but real Adolf Hitler loving Nazis are fighting. It's bonkers, dude. This is bonkers. I never thought I would live in a world like this. This is not what our forefathers fought for. It's not, folks.
Welcome back. So these major Pentagon Ukraine leaks of 2 weeks ago have blown a huge hole into the Pentagon's entire narrative constructed about that war. These documents reveal that despite the Biden White House's loud public boasts claiming otherwise, that in fact the Ukrainian military is in dire straits. It has little to no chance of driving Russia out of that territory anytime soon. The documents also indicate that Ukraine has taken major casualties, far more than the Russians. These documents also reveal how America has damaged its relationship with South Korea and Israel, among other states, by spying on them and by aggressively pushing them to aid Ukraine despite their misgivings. Simon Atiba is chief White House correspondent for Today News Africa, and thanks to his long career in African news and politics, Simon knows well what it looks like to have a government lying to its public. Well, now Americans are learning to expect constant lying from their own government, the empire of lies, as well. And Simon Atiba joins us now. Simon, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. Regarding Ukraine, how can Jean-Pierre and the White House continue to stand behind the White House podium and just lie to the American public about where, hundreds of billions of dollars are going?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a big shame. Just be in my shoe, right? You see it in the White House. You see John Kirby. He's the one doing the most lying, right? He comes to the White House and he tells us how Ukraine is winning the war. Ukraine is winning the war. They will soon drive the Russian out. And we need to keep supporting them as long as it takes. And then you see this document and you realize that it's all BS. He's been lying to us, lying to the American people. And also, the not just lying but as you said, you see the billions and billions and billions of dollars going there when they know that the outcome is defeat. So it's like a waste of time where you understand that people should just move to negotiation because they know that Ukraine is not winning the war and we not win the war, but they want the money to keep flowing to Ukraine. So the military industrial complex keeps, making the billions while the people die. The Ukrainians are dying. They're being killed more than previously known. And it's a shame that the White House is just, lying about the whole thing.
Yeah, the Ukrainians are dying. The Russians are dying. Christians are being stopped by cops along with the military, physically pulled from their bicycles and then driven to a military institution where they are given a uniform and a gun. They have no training. They have no experience. They have no desire to fight this war. They would rather actually just flee the corrupt oligarchy and leave Ukraine altogether than stand there and fight for this fake war whose premise is entire fake. And you mentioned the military-industrial complex siphoning off money from this. The World Economic Forum, no doubt, is going to come in and use this as a laundering operation as well, as American taxpayer dollars are going into this country where all of the bodies are buried as pertaining to bioweapons lab facilities that are Pentagon-operated. Victoria Nuland admitted that these facilities are there overseen by the CIA and funded by the taxpayers. So at what point does John Kirby have to come out and just say the truth? And at what point does Kevin McCarthy just say, we are done, the purse strings are closed, not one more red cent is going to this corrupt country set up and run by and for the benefit of oligarchs?
Kirby will not do that. Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary, will not do that. President Biden will not do that because the whole thing is based on a lie. And the lie is Ukraine will win the war and we are there for Ukraine. And if you remember last week when Kennedy announced was it last week? Yes, last week. When he announced that he was running for president and he highlighted how crazy this whole war is because no one is winning. Ukrainian will not win that war. No one is saying that it's good that the Russians invaded Ukraine. No one is saying that that's a good thing. But the truth is, negotiations are the only way forward. And so if you keep wasting time and keep telling people the lies, they won't come and tell the truth because the money has to keep flowing to Ukraine. And if you tell people that the Ukrainians are losing the war and they won't win that war even in 20 years, and that this war will turn into another Afghanistan in 20 years where the U.S. may be forced to intervene and send boots on the ground, and, the people will not want to that because you just withdrew forces from Afghanistan, saying that you were the man for peace. And now we realize that you are doing exactly the same thing in Ukraine after 20 years. All the negotiators will come and say that now it's time to negotiate. A few weeks ago, John Kirby was asked at the White House that when is the time to negotiate, because it was like, we don't want China, we don't recommend negotiation right now, has recommended by China. And we asked him, when is the right time to negotiate? And he said, no, we want the war to end, but, this is not the right time. And so it's about money and, nothing else.
Yeah. Speaking of China, they're siphoning wealth out of your home country as well and out of the continent of Africa, when they could absolutely, along with the very dangerous Israel lobby, could absolutely be using that money to prop up the people of Africa and get them on their own 2 feet. Do you see that as being consistent with what's happening in Ukraine?
Yeah, and that's why we are trying to, when we started Today News Africa, it was because we were trying to strengthen ties between the U.S. and Africa, because China was rising. They are buying up everything. Their influence is increasing. You see that in Sudan and in other places where China is taking over the entire continent of Africa, and the U.S. seems to be retreating. And the reason we started Today News Africa is to strengthen ties between U.S. and Africa with accurate information. The U.S. is not perfect. That's not what we are saying. But we are saying that when it comes to some elements of democracy, it's not fully, democratic, but some elements of democracy, the U.S. is still in the interest of Africa to have good and strong relationship or relations with the U.S. And we see China taking over and the U.S. is retreating, which is sad. And that's why, when at the White House, I see how, President Biden hosts 50 African leaders in Washington, D.C., and the African who is covering the White House is not allowed to ask a question. It shows you the level of disrespect, not just for me, but for the continent of Africa. And it shows you how unserious the U.S. is in, strengthening ties with Africa. And we see that in Sudan, where you have thousands of Americans who are now stranded and they can't come back home.
Does the State Department have any intentions of getting these Americans out of Sudan?
No. The same thing they did in Afghanistan. Once you withdraw, once you evacuate the military and you evacuate the embassy personnel, you don't have any way of evacuating the people. There are 16,000 Americans who are registered in Sudan and 1,000 who go there and who don't register. Right now, a lot of them are contacting me because they can't come. There's war in Sudan. The U.S. has abandoned them. Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has abandoned them. There's no plan. And now the U.S. is relying on Saudi Arabia, on Ethiopia, and on other countries to evacuate Americans who are stranded there, actually trapped.
What are the real dangers that these Americans face in Sudan now that the State Department has turned their back on them completely and abandoned them?
Yeah, some of them may die. We know one American citizen has already died, but many of them are trapped. So if this war turns into a full-blown civil war, we may have hundreds of Americans or even thousands of Americans who may die there. And, you talked about Victoria Nuland, who is the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs at the State Department. She was in Sudan in March. She was also in Ukraine before the war started there. She was in Sudan in March, and on April 15, the war started. And it shows you how the U.S. is losing influence in Africa and around the world. The U.S. was trying to, was pushing for a transition to democracy in Sudan and trying to unite the two armed forces. And they failed. No one is listening to the U.S. anymore. And, it's a shame. And now, Americans have to pay with their lives in Sudan.
Why is it that the American people are forced to listen to Karine Jean-Pierre, but that they can't hear your voice? Why are they freezing you out? Is it because you're a Christian? I mean, Is it because you're telling the truth? Why are they freezing you out?
No, if you do the right thing, you ask the tough questions and you try to do your job, what happens is the sideline, don't get me wrong, Washington, D.C. is a beautiful place. The White House is a beautiful place. Many journalists come to D.C. and many politicians and many business people come to D.C. to change the system. But when they get to D.C., they earn hundreds of thousands of dollars, they fly on Air Force One with the president, and they change. They're afraid to lose that position. And eventually they begin to connive with the president. And when someone like me does the job and asks the real question, the sideline you, they attack you, is about the job. You need to do the job. You need to ask real questions the American people really care about and American allies really care about. My job is not to become a friend to the press secretary or a friend to John Kirby. And, that's why I'm being attacked. That's why I'm being sidelined. That's why I was kicked out of the White House Correspondents Association. That's why next week when President Biden, Vice President Harris, they are going to the White House Correspondents Association dinner. That's why I wasn't allowed to buy a ticket.
All right, folks. That's Truman's Town Hall for April 25th, 2023. Thank you for downloading. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing with a friend. Please like this podcast, subscribe to this podcast, share with a friend, all that good stuff. I really, truly appreciate it. I'm going to put out more here on the audio version. I like the radio format. That's just me. I'll throw out videos too. And as a matter of fact, this Sunday at 8:45, myself and the Red Rooster, we invite folks we know. They could be pastors, ministers, lay people who just sit in the pews, but really, really, truly love Jesus. We get together at 8:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we talk about different doctrines, and we have discussions. Sometimes it turns into a debate, but it's still a discussion. At the end of the day, we still love each other, even though we're from different denominations, different walks of life, from different places around the United States. We still get along. It's okay to have a conversation and disagree and still get along in the world. It's okay. All right, folks, I'm Matt Truman. Thank you. And I'll talk to you this time next week.